Hello humans, it's just Martine, and it's time to play 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, but with books. Traditionally, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon is a silly little game where you have somebody start with a random celebrity arbitrarily chosen, and you have them connect people via the movies that they've both been in. The end goal is to get to the American actor Kevin Bacon in as few links as possible. For example, if you started with like Timothée Chalamet, you'd be like, Timothée Chalamet was in Dune. You know who else was in Dune? Austin Butler. And I don't actually know how Kevin Bacon's gonna end in that line. I haven't thought it through. And also I have no idea who Kevin Bacon truly is or anything that he's been in. But you know what I do know? Books. So my challenge to myself is simple. I start with a randomly chosen book and I end with another randomly chosen book. I have to find links between the books in no more than 6 total reads, including my starting and ending book, and I have to find connections to lead from one book to the other so that I make it from my first book to my last book. When I was looking around my room over Christmas break, I selected She Loves You as my starting book, and then I looked around for a book that seemed wildly different and decided that my last book will be Steeltown, USA. So the goal is to get from She Loves You to Steeltown, USA. How will I do it? You'll have to watch and see. Let's get reading. We had our starting place, She Loves Me, and I finally read it. And I'm giving it 4 stars. This is like a middle grade book about this girl who is obsessed with the Beatles back in their big heyday, and she gets tickets to go to a Beatles concert near her, but then the world is kind of conspiring against her and she's not sure that she's going to be able to get there, but her biggest goal in this whole book is to meet Paul McCartney. Basically, she feels like if she meets Paul McCartney, everything will be right with life, and her life is not going as she wants it to right now. I do think this is like an interesting peek into like tween teenage fandom, especially around the Beatles, which like I wasn't alive for the heyday of the Beatles, but I've been around for things like One Direction. And so seeing the similarities and differences across these different time points is interesting to me. And this was just like a really wholesome, cute book, I felt like. Also a very quick read, which I appreciated. But in terms of the first link, I have a couple of different things to think about. So I made this list of possible links that I could use. So it's set in both Rhode Island and Boston. The main character is from Rhode Island and a majority of the book takes place there, but the concert that she's going to and ends up going to is in Boston. So I have both of those things to work with, along with the time period, and this is set in the 60s. I also did some like word association with this book, Beatles, music, fandom. Also, the chapter titles are song names, which I might be able to find another book that has a chapter title that are song names or some other type of reference, and that might be a good next step. There are also themes about losing your best friend to popular kids, and although I'm not sure how I would connect that to Steeltown, USA, it is a stepping stone that I could use. And then this also technically involves a plan or a scheme. Circling back to the idea of setting, one thing that I thought I could do is use the location to location jump and have all of my degrees be different locations. In that case, I would start in Boston, so Massachusetts, and then move to the state that is directly next to Massachusetts to go in the direction that I want to go. So in that case, I would go from Massachusetts to New York to Pennsylvania to Ohio, which is where Steeltown, USA takes place. And that would leave me doing this in 4 links instead of 6, which would be great. However, I think it's kind of an easy cop-out, and I do want to give myself a challenge. So I haven't yet figured out which book I'm going to use as my second link, but those are all of my thoughts. And if time ticks away and I can't think of any good next stepping stone or don't have a book from my next possible list of stepping stones that I feel drawn to and feel might lead me in the right direction, then I'll consider finding a book set in New York. But for now, we'll let the ideas percolate. A little while ago, I was reading this one book called The Ballad of Darcy and Russell, and I was like, heyo, this would be great for the next link in my game, because you'll remember that in She Loves Me there was like music involved and also a concert and also traveling to a concert. Well, The Ballad of Darcy and Russell starts off at this music festival and involves a lot of traveling. So I said, perfect next step. And I'm giving this one 4 stars. I had a really good time with it. It was like a cute YA about these 2 people who randomly meet while traveling back from this music festival. There's like not much to say about it. It wasn't the swooniest thing, but it also wasn't like the worst. I just really had a good time reading it. And there were lots of interesting conversations to be had. And so some of the possible links for this one are, of course, we could stay with music and concerts and all of those things, but staying on the same link seems kind of pointless, because if we moved from book 1 to book 2, like we should get some momentum and have some progress between books 2 and 3. We shouldn't be just staying on the one note, right? We'll never get to the 6th link that way. What else is involved in this book? Well, we've got a YA romance. That's up for a contender, I guess. I forget where this takes place. Why do I feel like it was in the West, the Western United States? Mayhaps. I don't know. I do not remember now. What I do remember is that there was a lot of discussion about 2 things. 1, fame, and 2, wealth. So there's definitely some possibilities there. Got some ideas about where I could go next with the idea of like wealth specifically. Because if we think about this, my final book that I'm trying to end up on is about a town that used to be known for a specific industry. It stopped being known for the industry. There's something about like wealth and industrialization somewhere in there. I can feel it in my bones. So we still have options for like where we could go, but we'll just have to see where I end up next. For my next link, I did indeed use the idea of wealth and also like wealth disparity. And I read Linden Hills, which I'd never heard of before, but was pretty good. I gave it 3.5 stars. This is a story about this very particular neighborhood called Linden Hills. Linden Hills is a very particular neighborhood because it was technically started by this one family, and they own like a lot of the land, and they decided to lease this land to people so long as they qualify for 1,000 years and a day. In other words, like your family can stay here pseudo forever situation, but you have to qualify. And the focus of the neighborhood is on Black families. So you've got this really interesting neighborhood where these houses are passed down among generations of Black families. And so it's a very like wealthy Black neighborhood, which is right next to a very not wealthy neighborhood. And a lot of the discussions of this book are about those disparities. We're following characters from within Linden Hills and then characters that live outside of Linden Hills that go into Linden Hills for different reasons. For example, one of the main characters we follow is Willie. He lives outside of Linden Hills, but one of his best friends lives in Linden Hills, and they also start doing some odd jobs in Linden Hills for various people. We're focusing on the insider versus outsider perspective. We're also focusing on like the toxicity of making it culture, because people who aren't in Linden Hills, like that's the one thing that they want in life. They want to get to Linden Hills. But once you're in Linden Hills, you're still not happy because you want to move down into the hills closer and closer to Tupelo Drive, which is where like the founders lived. So there's still this like hierarchy in Linden Hills itself. We also have lots of conversations about like happiness and how happiness and power or happiness and wealth are not connected in many ways. So a lot of the wealthy people that we follow in this book are incredibly unhappy. And some of them, you would think that their wealth made them free in a certain way, but there are a couple of characters who feel very stuck in their situation, and that situation involves a lot of wealth. So just a lot of interesting conversations. I think where it lost me in a couple times were that some of the perspectives were less interesting to me than others. For example, I always loved when we were following Willie and Lester. That was good. Following Luther was okay. Luther is basically like the current generation of the family that started Linden Hills. So this guy named Luther Nadid started Linden Hills, and every generation since has had a Luther Nadid, and we're following like the current one in the time frame of the book. He was okay. His wife's story I thought was really interesting and had like a large chunk of the commentary. There was one perspective we followed kind of suddenly near the end, and then for like a while there, and then it dropped off. That was a little misplaced and a little weird. I understand what they were trying to do with it, I think, but I just don't think it worked necessarily. And I found that perspective way less interesting than some of the others. I was like, let's go back to Willie and Lester, you know? Almost a 4 stars, but it just didn't quite reach that for me. It was going to be a 4 stars, and then that one perspective near the end really dragged. It just dragged. 3.5 it is. That's still really good. Let's talk about some possible connections with this book. We obviously have the wealth, but again, like the music to music jump, we don't necessarily want to use that because we want to make progress in our links. There are things about like intergenerational stories in this. So we get many generations within the story. So something intergenerational could be helpful to make the connection. Also, the focus on like diverse communities, Black communities specifically, there's something there for the taking. Although Russell and Darcy had like a wealth disparity message, they were both kids, So it was not their wealth necessarily that we were talking about. Now that we've shifted to Linden Hills, we're talking about like the personal wealth of the characters. In that way, we can talk about like working class, which might be really helpful for this to get to Steeltown, USA, specifically because of Willie. So that's an option. And I actually think I have a really good book in mind that would make a great next connection, but we'll have to see when I read it. I am so excited to talk about this one, not because I loved the book, it was just okay, but because I think it is the last connection that we are looking for. So I think we're gonna make it in 5 books instead of 6, which I'm hype about. No, I know that we're gonna make it in 5 books because it's just the perfect connection. Because I read The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. There were a couple reasons why I picked this, but it ended up being an even better connection than I thought. Originally, I was looking at books that had to do with like a focus on communities, that had a focus on race relations, and that had a bit of a historical aspect because Linden Hills had all of those things. What I didn't realize before I started reading the book, making it even more perfect, is that the community that we're following in the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store is actually based on a hill. So like Linden Hills, there was a hill. In this book, there was also a hill, Chicken Hill, that was really important for the story and was responsible for a lot of the divisions in the community, just like in Linden Hills. So this was actually the perfect match to follow that book. Unfortunately, I gave it 3 stars. 3 stars is still a good rating for me, but it's not the best, obviously. I just felt like I had trouble connecting with this writing style. I understood basically what was happening in the story. I thought there were some interesting characters, but the way that it was written made it really hard for me to pay attention at times. But what is this book even about? I know it was popular a little while ago. It's a historical fiction. We're set in this town, like, is it Pottstown or Pottsville? It's one of them. There are 2 primary communities. There's a large Jewish community and there's a large Black community. We're following various characters in and around that, but I think the main center of the story is this woman whose family owns the Heaven and Earth grocery store, and when she gets married, her husband keeps the store. This is a big deal because she has a lot of relationships within the community. She's a very central character in their community, and there's this young boy who ends up needing a place to go, Dodo, and he ends up going and living with this woman and her husband. And things kind of go from there because the government is after this kid. A lot of the central aspects of the story revolve around that situation, what happens in that situation, the repercussions, etc. And so again, I feel like it was a really interesting setup, talking about the different aspects of community, the who knows who, the who does what for whom, but the writing style was just really hard for me to follow at times. But the reason I think this is the perfect connection to Steeltown, USA, hear me out. So at first I was like, okay, I think this could be a connection because it's historical, right? And Steeltown, USA is about a town whose heyday was like a little while ago. But more than that, the Heaven and Earth grocery store takes place in Pennsylvania. And when I was making my first link from She Loves Me, I was talking about the various ways that I could hop states to get where I was trying to go. And I was like, I don't want to do that this whole time, but it's an option. Well, Pennsylvania shares a border with Ohio, and Steeltown, USA is about a town in Ohio. So I was like, I already feel like the connection is there. Also, Steeltown, USA will probably largely be about the repercussions of a town after an incident. The same thing with the Heaven and Earth grocery store. So I already thought it was a solid link. But then when I was really getting into reading the Heaven and Earth grocery store, I was highlighting things that like really stood out to me because I felt like they were really strong connections to Steeltown, USA. Namely, from what I read and highlighted, in the town that we're following in the Heaven and Earth grocery store, right next to it, there seems to be a big factory that does stuff with steel and iron, which is exactly like the factory in the town in Steeltown, USA. So I was like, this is actually perfect, the perfect connection. I'm going to jump to reading Steeltown, USA, and that should complete the whole circle. I feel like it's interesting. I've read many different genres doing this. A lot of historical stuff, I will say. Most of the historical stuff doesn't serve as the connection between the books, right? So far we've had music, wealth, neighborhoods, and then steel. That's how I'm putting it all together. So let's read this last book.
The idea of specific ethnic neighborhoods, the idea of iron or steel making, led us to Steeltown, USA, our final book and the ultimate goal of this video. Woo! So I read Steeltown, USA, and I'm giving it 3.5 stars. It's a nonfiction book about Youngstown, Ohio, which I had never heard of before, but clearly lots of other people know about this because this book was sitting out on the table and my dad was like, Steeltown, USA, is that about Youngstown, Ohio? And I was like, yeah, it is. It's mainly a book that charts the different eras of Youngstown, Ohio, if you will, from back when they were big in steel manufacturing to then when they were out in front of the world going through deindustrialization as one of the first places to go through that, then all the crime problems that happened after that, the way that private prisons snatched up land there, and basically how all of those events impacted the vibe of the community, the overarching issues that the community has always had in different disparities. I thought it was pretty interesting, particularly because I knew nothing about this topic. And also I thought the authors did a good job of making it an accessible book to people like me who had no idea what was going on and maybe limited interest as well. Like, I didn't absolutely love it, hence the 3.5 stars, but I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to. I particularly found the section on crime very interesting, particularly when they were talking about arson in Youngstown, Ohio, and the time when like all of the houses were going down in value, and so a ton of arson was being committed just to try and like get insurance money for that. But it was a very prevalent pattern in the area, which is crazy. I've never heard of that. So that was fascinating. I think it's so interesting to have gotten to this book starting with like a young adult middle grade book about the Beatles, ending with this nonfiction look at a particular town that dealt with deindustrialization and workers' conflicts, very different books. And so I'm proud of the fact that I was able to link them. As a reminder, I went from She Loves Me and took the connection of music to get to The Ballad of Darcy and Russell. I used the idea of wealth to get to Linden Hills. I used the idea of segregated neighborhoods and historical neighborhoods to get to the Heaven and Earth grocery store. And originally I used the Heaven and Earth grocery store to get to Steeltown, USA via steel and iron working. But I also feel like both of those last two books had commentary about how communities change over time, specifically, which I guess Linden Hills did too, but the negative effects that we see from that change. They had that in common as well. I accomplished my task in less than 6 books. I'd be curious if you have any idea what your path would have looked like if you had tried to go from She Loves Me to Steeltown, USA, or if you ever plan on doing this challenge. I would love to know. I think it's fun. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below. What was your favorite connection between books that I used in this video? And subscribe for more bookish and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!